So it's extremely difficult to use the paleography to verify the chronology. Although people use it then to make comparisons. We have an obvious circular argument here. What you need to always bear in mind is how things get dated, particularly in ancient times. I mean, in modern times, we know to some extent how things get dated. But imagine you're a historian, okay, from, say, 300 AD or 500 AD, possibly even 1200 AD or later. First of all, it's not entirely clear that your intention in writing history is the same as the intention of a modern historian, namely to give a faithful chronicle of events. We cannot take this for granted at all. As a matter of fact, it's a fair assumption that many ancient writings had a sort of moralistic purpose. They were much more in keeping with, like Roman histories was showing, the grandeur of certain figures, giving uplifting accounts and so forth. This is very, very important because the results that we're talking about are, in some cases, are going to look and seem so preposterous to you that you will be very tempted to just turn your mind off or turn your back to the whole thing. And what Ellen and I are above all trying to do is not make you throw out the data. You may discard Fomenko's interpretation of the data, you may discard the interpretations that we have of the data, but you shouldn't throw out the data. In my opinion, the data is incontrovertible. You see on the right-hand side, this is the Roman Empire from 82 BC to the 3rd century AD. On the left-hand side, we have the Roman Empire from the 3rd century through the 6th century AD. Okay, we are writing the Roman emperors in the order in which they occur according to the chronicles, according to the histories, even according to modern history. To read the diagram, the spaces, say, from here to here, represent the length of reign of that emperor. So, in other words, here's 41 years, a long reign. This diagram is supposed to show a kind of symmetry between a period of time in which you have a sequence of Roman rulers, and then a period of time more than 300 years later in which you have another sequence of Roman emperors. Now, let's start here with Augustus. Okay, he reigns for 41 years, and Constantine the Great Augustus reigns for 31 years. And you say, well, big deal. I agree. That's 10 years difference. But follow what happens after here. You have Tiberius compared to Constantius II, 23 and 24. When we come to Caligula, it's 4 years and 2 years. Caligula is paired to Julian the Apostate. Then we have Claudius, 13 years, and Valentinian, 11 years, and so forth. Now, so you understand the principle behind the figure. It is meant to show the symmetry between lengths of reign of emperors who are understood to have reigned more than 300 years apart. Toward the end of this period in Roman history, we have a sequence of 4 emperors who all reigned for less than 1 year. Okay, they died or they got off by the legions or whatever it was. And that's paired by a sequence of rulers who all reigned less than 1 year on the other side. Okay, very, very conspicuous. Now, the other thing that's interesting is this period, sort of in Roman history, ends with an invasion by the Goths, where you have Caracalla. Oddly enough, exactly on the other side, you have a second, let's put it this way, quote, unquote, second invasion of the Goths. Okay, on the left, we have the Roman Empire from the 1st century BC to the 3rd century AD. Then we have the Holy Roman Empire from the 10th century to the 13th century. In other words, on the left here, we have largely the same people who are that we had on the right-hand side in the previous one, but now they're being compared to rulers of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, basically about 1,050 years later. And you see that we have another symmetry. Okay, this is how it's reported. But remember, we have to bracket almost everything of this kind that we hear, because we don't know what the veracity of the chronicles is, what the intention of the chronicles was, or even what the people really understood by it.
I don't think anybody is in any position, really, to make a hypothesis. You get a million ideas occurring to you when you really look into this. Many people that I talk to, they want to get a hypothesis, they want to go off and run with it, to the exclusion of everything else before they understand anything about really what's going on. And I think that people have no business making hypotheses about this until they really understand the extent and the depth and the weight of what he has done. I mean, any like really nailed down hypothesis. Obviously lots of crazy ideas are going to occur to you, but because they occur to me all the time. and I try to follow them out as much as I can. But I mean, we are not making hypotheses here because really we're not in a position to.
Remember the little pattern up here? Okay, where we have a little block of history here, and then we shift it back and so forth. Fomenko's opinion is the only legitimate history. Now, this doesn't mean that nothing happened before this. The only history that our documents address themselves to is from the period of 300 AD up till modern times. Everything else is a projection of that material, that historical material, back in time due to the errors that scholars made in trying to synchronize relative blocks of history. Remember, there are three shifts. One's 333 years, one is 1,053 years, and the other one is 1,778 years. He has an account of each one of these and how these could have happened historically to produce those shifts. But his is what we might call one radical interpretation. Now, before you say this guy's out of his mind, what Fomenko does, given one pair of duplicates, what Fomenko does is says, well, can we establish astronomically which one is valid? So, take, for example, Thucydides' Peloponnesian Wars. There are three eclipses mentioned in the Peloponnesian Wars, and they're described with great fullness. There's a lunar eclipse, an annular solar eclipse, and another lunar eclipse. You can infer what the path of totality was, and the whole deal from these descriptions. The creators of modern chronology, namely Scaliger and Petavius, trying to astronomically solve the problem of those eclipses, were not able to do it without leaving out some of the data provided by Thucydides, who, by the way, says he was a witness of this. So what Fomenko did, he said, let's make no presuppositions about this. Where are the exact astronomical solutions for this triad of eclipses? And there turns out to be one in the 11th century AD and one in the 12th century AD, and no others. So what Fomenko does quite regularly is he will appeal to astronomical arguments to try to determine which is the principal one, and his conclusion, and however crazy it may sound, is extraordinarily well argued, is that the only legitimate history is the modern history from about 300 on, and most of that, by the way, is from 900 on. From 300 on, we got like statuary documents and things like that.
He thinks most of the things that we think of as historical events really did happen, but the question is when and where, and maybe, of course, how many times. And he thinks, well, it didn't happen 10 times, it only happened once, and most of that stuff happened after 900.
Yeah. By the way, and this is something that we need to find out more about, Fomenko applies his statistical methods not just to European history, but also to Middle Eastern history, including Egypt, India, and so forth, and it's riddled with repetitions of the same kind.
Would that not seem to indicate, that's almost the most fascinating part, I mean, either the whole thing is a fudge, or astronomically, astrologically, it's repeating itself. When you look at the pattern,
you have no idea how tempting that is. As Ellen mentioned, there was a tradition of studying history astrologically. It starts in the Arab world with a whole series of people. The most definitive treatise was written by a man named Abu Mashar. He uses, for the astrologers in the office, in the room, he uses Jupiter-Saturn cycles, which have a tendency to occur in the same, what's called the same triplicity, in the same triplicity of signs for long periods of time, except they drift slightly, and every 240 years they change triplicity, and every 960 years they return to the same degree. Now, these methods were translated into Latin, but they were used by all medieval Latin chronologers. In other words, what are you going to do to write history if you don't have any documents? You use astrology.